This is the Parents in Sport podcast. Amazing guests, honest conversations, topics that matter.
Welcome to season 5 of the Parents in Sport podcast. I am your host, Gordon MacLelland. I'm delighted to be joined today by sports psychology consultant, speaker and author Chris Shambrook. Chris, thank you for joining us on the show.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation. Great to be chatting.
We hope you're all enjoying the action from Paris. We certainly are here at Working with Parents in Sport, and we thought what better than to get somebody on who's experienced it firsthand through the course of 6 Olympic cycles and 5 Olympic Games in Chris. But Chris, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Very, very quickly from an Olympic perspective, I got the role of sports psychologist with the British rowing team in 1997. So my first Olympic cycle was the Sydney Games. And so I was with the team from Sydney all the way through to Rio. A little bit of involvement with some of the athletes in the build up to Tokyo as well, and a bit of support for the Irish Olympic Federation in Tokyo as well. But most of the Olympic experience with the rowing team through what was a fantastic era from 2000 onwards, which was building on the Steve Redgrave era that started way back before that as well, but peaked in 1996 when that was the only gold medal of Team GB for that Olympic Games. Then UK sport funding came in, lottery funding came in sort of around 97, 98. So I was really part of the system when everything was becoming upgraded in a really holistic way. Other bits and pieces of involvement in some other sports and with coaches along the way as well, but the rowing was the one where I got to kind of be on the inside and enjoying what was some really incredible moments.
Yeah, I mean, you must have had some amazing experiences. We'll dig a little bit deeper into some of those across all of those games. So it sort of brought, I guess, something Dame Catherine Granger, I think, has been quoted as saying about you, Chris, and obviously watching her this morning as the British quad won gold. She said, that you had brilliant new ways of thinking about problems and bringing out top performances. What are your memories of that sort of era, particularly maybe those home games? Presumably London was pretty big for all of you, was it?
Yeah, London was pretty big. Catherine's a really good reference point because I think Catherine and I both started on the team in 1997, and Rio was her last Olympics, as was mine. So I kind of got to experience a lot of the sort of different challenges and opportunities that she had through that period. But London particularly was, my memory of that was actually the season had gone pretty well, and there was a training camp a couple of weeks before on the women's side of the program where two of the boats set world best times. Now it's unofficial because it's your own closed program timing, but we knew the boats were flying, and you therefore know the other boats are going pretty well. And both boats that set the world's best time actually went on to win the gold medal as well. And there was another one of the boats that was pretty close to them as well. So between the lightweight women's double, the women's double, and the women's pair, there were 3 gold medals out of that one training camp, and that was just a really exciting mix of successes. Because, with Helen Glover and Heather Stanning winning the first gold for Team GB at that Olympics, that was actually their first Olympic Games as well. And you don't get many athletes who come in and medal at Olympic Games, let alone the first one. Catherine and Anna in their double, that was obviously, a turnaround from Beijing for Catherine, and for Anna had got a bronze medal in Beijing as well. But they'd had a stellar season, and it was just so great watching them and Heather and Helen training together and going really well. But then there was the lightweight women's double of Sophie and Kat, who had just been so tenacious in terms of how they'd taken on the challenge and how they worked together with their coach and their coaching team. And so you got these 3 very different stories. You remember Kat Copeland going across the line with the arms up, kind of, we won the Olympics, and just this pure joy, and then almost the pressure and expectation on Catherine, and then the taking of the opportunity of getting the first gold for Team GB by Heather and Helen by just doing what they did best and performing brilliantly. It just shows some of the different stories that are present. Medal colour might be the same, and whether that's bronze, silver, or gold, or a fourth, or a sixth, or a fifth, whatever, the position might be the same, but the stories are wildly different, and the meaning and what it takes for people to get in that position and follow through. So that's the memory for me, as well as, on the men's side of the team, there were some great performances in the lightweight program, the men's program as well, and it just everything, with 13 boats out of the 14 qualified and 9 medals delivered. It was just an exceptional thing where everything got on a roll, and home advantage also just added an icing on the cake for that happening for that whole games.
Yeah, and it was a golden era, wasn't it? I mean, those boats were streaming down the river in 2012, and it felt like you were cheering, almost every morning that the TVs went on. I think a lot of the times, a lot of people who maybe don't get that close to that level of sport or see what it is going on. Can you just give us a bit of a glimpse, behind the scenes, these high performers, the commitment, what they're putting into it, some of the things that you were, working with them around during that time? Because it is different. People say, oh, I want to be high performance when I go to the Olympics. I want to be a professional footballer, but it's not for everybody, and I think the reality of it looks very different to maybe how the general public perceive it.
Yes, yeah, and I think it's the ratio of preparation to performance and competition that is the most challenging. And when you've got an endurance sport like rowing, or you've got very technical sports, that everyone's got their kind of training to competition ratio, but the ratio is very high, where you're doing loads and loads of really forensically focused and sometimes just hard graft training, which often doesn't feel like you're making a huge amount of progress. You just know you're doing a lot of stuff. So it can be it's a real challenge to stay driven and motivated and confident when a lot of the time the tendency might be to focus on things you're not good enough at. And so doubt can come in that time when you're also physically tired. And so there's a lot of managing of progress, doubts, emotion, projecting to the future, and worrying about what might or might not happen based upon today's training session, maybe forgetting some of the brilliance that got you in this position in the first place. So there's a constant challenge for each individual to find their pathway through. And then you've got the really interesting situation where you've got a squad of athletes training together who are friends and colleagues supporting each other, but they're probably going for limited number of places. So you also get this, there's also a healthy competition internally, and you want the best for the team, but you want the best for yourself. And so there's all sorts of just interesting conflicts to manage, and an acceptance really that failure is part of the bargain if you're going to try and succeed. And that's really interesting. Whether I fail on a training session or I ultimately fail in not making the crew, but I've helped someone else develop who's going to go forward and get a medal. I've succeeded in playing my part, but I haven't got the ultimate goal. And so people have got to be really clear about what the opportunity is for you to learn about yourself and how you might grow and develop beyond what medal you might be able to hang around your neck, or what kind of accolades you might be able to get along the way as well. And I think that's some of the stuff that, that's the stuff that weighs heavily on people's psyche and emotions, which is why we see much more of the stories about kind of the mental health challenges that people face, because it's just, relentless.
Yeah.
It's like applying for your job every day and hoping that you kind of get accepted again to do the next day. It can feel like that. So I think you've got to be ready for that, as well as the brilliant upsides that come as well.
Yeah, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that failure piece, because there's no doubting, certainly in my work, the biggest, one of the biggest challenges parents face, and the most popular workshop we get asked to deliver is, how do you manage disappointment with your kid as a parent, particularly when they're younger than that. What I do want to go back to, because you just sort of, a sort of light bulb moment thinking about when we're in performance programs. I think about football academies, and there's no getting away from the fact that I think people sort of try to rank their children from a young age as to where they stand, worried about whether they'll be there the following year. Probably in many ways, there'll be, I'm sure, some dark thoughts from some parents that it'd be nice if he got injured or he moved somewhere else, because it opens up an opportunity for my child. And I'm sure that goes on, and whether or not anybody will admit it's another matter. But the reality is actually there's a real strength in having a really good group, isn't there? In many ways, you should want the best group because your individual progress probably will be better by having great people around you. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And that was one of the things, within the rowing setup, whether it was the whole team training together or the men's squad doing their stuff, the women's squad doing their stuff, what you knew was that because there was a pedigree of Olympic champions in there, you benchmark yourself every day in terms of how well am I doing against someone who's already done it. And the power of that becomes really very, clear when you see the momentum that starts to build, to the extent that you see, a lot of turnover post Rio Olympics and not many people returning. And actually it's taken an additional Olympic cycle to get back to the success that we're about to see, purely because there's just now much more experience back in the team from what I can see from the outside. But when you know that by going to train, you're going to have the best development and probably better than anyone else, you're winning the training competition. And if you can win the training competition, the chances are you've given yourself a biggest opportunity to win the competition per se. And that's where, I saw that within elite setups, the athletes who are really good at understanding how does this environment, if this environment was built just for me, how good a job am I doing of enjoying it and benefiting from it? So that concept of, wow, I'm really lucky that someone's put all of these other brilliant people in place for me to benefit from. I wonder how well I can take advantage of it. But I had that conversation with many different athletes. Look, just pretend this is a game and UK Sport has put this entire thing in place just for you.
Yeah.
How do you want to make the most of it? And and so it's then up to everyone to kind of go, okay, well, what do I want to do with it? How do I want to benefit from it? And if at some point that means I want to choose to walk away, or if I can't continue for one reason, but I know I've invested in the best way I can, I think it helps create a greater sense of self, even though there's that bigger picture around you as well.
Yeah, because I think you see a lot. I would say particularly in the youth space with this, and a lot of young people who go from maybe being dominant in a let's say a small pond, and it opens up, and they maybe get selected. I was over doing some work with Leinster Rugby and some girls who'd done particularly well at under-18 regional girls, and then they'd gone into the main Leinster program, and actually they did need to just trust themselves and back themselves and do the things that had got them there. But then they suffered this sort of, I guess one parent said to me, they're really struggling with imposter syndrome, this doubt that they should be there. And actually that, obviously there's things we can do that to manage it then. But I think we also have got to recognize before then, actually, we just want the best groups with the best environments and the best people almost pulling each other along. So it's a strength, isn't it? The competition's a strength as opposed to a threat.
Yeah, and there's a real set of paradoxes in high performance that are useful to recognize and enjoy the challenge of managing them. So there are very few athletes who haven't got an incredibly deep drive for perfection, but the relationship between perfection and imposter syndrome, there's a big overlap in the Venn diagram of that. But that's a force for good because it means that I'm constantly driving for more. I'm never satisfied. But that's also incredibly unhealthy if that becomes the only driver and you're not getting better at recognizing how good you are.
Yeah.
So you have to be a perfectionist. If we're going to rate perfection on the ability to judge how good you are, you need to have a high degree of brilliance at that, as well as being brilliant at picking out the bits that you need to get better at. So that whole quality is really important, but we tend to see the downside of it because we don't do the due diligence in terms of, hey, you've got really high standards. I want you to be the best in the world at knowing how good you already are, as well as being the best in the world at knowing how you might add to that or what would make you better. And then we can expand these qualities to actually be a force for good rather than I mustn't have imposter syndrome or I mustn't be a perfectionist. Just like, no, do it. But start playing with that as well as, you can be a perfectionist, but you can also be your greatest supporter.
Yeah.
one will come more naturally than the other, but let's see if we can play the game of that. And that's where I think those environments are full of people who are never satisfied. So you have to make a really good effort to pause press the pause button every now and again and kind of go, right, let's practice being satisfied. Not because it's going to make us complacent, because it updates our confidence foundation to then be able to go again and challenge ourselves from a position of strength rather than a position of worry that I'm not good enough. And I'm now just myopically focused on all the things that, I've been told I need to improve. I've just lost sight of the brilliance that has given me the opportunity to improve all these things. Yeah. Trust me, if you weren't a legend at all these things, we wouldn't be worried about these things over here. But let's keep the balance of those things really in tune.
Yeah, I think that perfectionist one's interesting, actually, quite timely. Next month, we've got he describes himself as a recovering perfectionist in a former professional cricketer called Lewis Hatchett, who's doing an awful lot of research into perfectionism, and he's had to even, go through it all himself. And we were just talking, we were saying, as you say, there are some good things about being a perfectionist, some very good things, yet there are some things that you probably need to reframe or potentially think about from a negative side, which I think then leads me on to my next point, because I know this is a real bugbear of yours and it's a bugbear of mine as well, is that then if we look at portions of social media, the way things are necessarily reported, or as people said, one size fits all solutions. We then get the statements that you've already said there, such as, "Oh well, perfectionism is a bad thing," and it doesn't have to. And there's loads of these scattered around. I use them in workshops. I pull up 3 or 4 to make the point that actually, for all of these statements, you can probably connect with some of them, you can probably contradict some of them, and it's a hell of a lot more complicated. So let's get curious and let's discuss it, because there does seem to be a trend towards, here is one solution, it's a one size fits all, and this is a blanket statement. And the brilliant book that I know you've read and I've read, No Silver Bullet by Steve Pearson, a really good read. I've enjoyed bringing that into our work. What do you make of it all? What's your advice to parents who pick up these snippets of information? What do we do?
So it's really interesting because it's a big challenge, but it's a maturation process, I think, and it's an ability to kind of go, right, ultimately, the people who I'm looking at have gone through a process of working out what's right for them. Me doing a copy and paste of what has worked out as right for them is not me copying the right thing. I need to copy the ambition to work out what's right for me. How did they work out what's right for them? What did they kind of learn about themselves that meant they could reject one thing and focus on another, or they knew there was so it's actually about that the ability to enjoy taking this information and kind of go, how does that feel for me based upon what I know to be true about me? What do I lean towards it? Do I lean against it? But and I would also say it's helpful for people to kind of, just think of most things as a balance. So if we have a seesaw, one side of the seesaw is weighted towards the preference that we have. Actually, I prefer that side. Right. It doesn't mean the other side is totally irrelevant to you. It just means it's not going to have the same natural appeal and it won't fit as well. But it doesn't mean you can't practice thinking in that way or behaving in that way. So I think if you've got this approach, you kind of say, look, what feels like the side you naturally go to, and how good a job are you doing of enjoying that and making the most out of that? What does the other side look like? When might that be useful? When might actually leaning towards that one be a bit of a helpful contrast for you? And when might I try and get the balance right between the two? I give you, so we go back to Heather Stanning and Helen Glover. Helen Glover is a brilliantly competitive person, and she loves being better than everybody else. Heather Stanning is a brilliant self-referenced performer who loves being better than she was yesterday. Now, between the two of them, you've got a superpower where you've always got the opportunity to kind of go, right, when do we need to be absolutely competing against anything that moves, because Helen's going to lead us on that? And when do we need to be absolutely brilliant at making ourselves better than we were, independent of what anyone, because Heather's going to lead on that? And you know, you can enjoy the power that that contrast brings. We've all got an opportunity to have both of those things within us, even though there is that natural one that kind of goes, that's me, that fits, and I know and accept and love being that way, wired that way. So that's where I kind of go, you know, if we can work towards that, some acceptance of what is naturally us, but a curiosity about how we might blend some other things into it, not change it. Because that's the other thing these sort of binary things tell us to do, is this is right and this is wrong. You shouldn't be like this. You should be. It's just like, it's not true. So it's the blend that we're after, really, and the ability to kind of, you know, mix it up, but still know that if I can get in the sweet spot of doing it, you know, having it all come through, love it. I'm going to do it that way.
Yeah, and I think for any sports parents listening, which I know we'll have a lot of these who will listen to this, I think if you see any blanket statements, and those of you who've done that sessions with us, you've just got to treat them with a degree of wariness, because Chris has talked about some things there. You know, I could think of things like intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Everybody says to you, oh, you need to be intrinsically motivated. But as Chris said there are some young people who are just motivated by winning and being the best. They will probably pick up some of their processes just because that's their motivation. It can be a good thing. It can be a bad thing. I think about things such as what will be a push for some children will be perceived as pressure by another child. And we've talked about on this show as well about people trying to say some sports parents have been bad, they've been good, they've been helpful and unhelpful. And the challenge of labels is wrong. You know, people tried to criticize David Beckham's dad for his approach with David growing up. But if you watch things like that documentary, who's to say that what he did didn't help him get through what many human beings would never have been able to navigate through in the challenges that he faced? And I think that our ability to, you know, remain curious, consider what it is we're seeing, where the information's actually coming from. I think I talk a lot around people stood watching football, people on gym balconies, swimming balconies. Who's telling who the information? What is their motivation? What's in it for them? And I think for all of us, it's about us, you know, getting people like Chris on the show, exploring these stories. But ultimately, it is your child. They are different to everybody else. You need to work with them, because what works for one child won't work for another. And as Chris said, the more you go through it, the more you try things, the more you experiment, you can bin some of them if they're not proven to be working at that point in time, and adapt. It doesn't mean you can't go back to them later on.
Yeah, and you know, if you think of a couple of additional things there, I think, you know, we could look at, you know, if you're playing a sport where you get to try different equipment, you get to try do I like this? Do I like this equipment? Does it make a difference? Does it comfortable? Does it feel like it's worth sticking with? Because I think it's going to make a difference for me. It's just like, well, actually, some of the personality stuff. So that, you know, I'm going to try this personality, you know, on for size, and it's not to change your personality. It's just like, can I step into that space and become comfortable at using it? And you know, I think there's also some. You know, usually there is a way to take your personality and bring it to life in the other flip side. So the intrinsic, extrinsic motivation, you know, and the competitive thing, you know, you talk to people about, right, you want to beat everyone at everything. I want you to be the best in the world at bettering yourself every day. So then you get the best of both worlds. You get that desire to be the best, but you know, we've now just made up a world ranking of, you know, who's the best at bettering themselves, because the ego-oriented person will want to be at the top of that. But actually, the people who are very individually oriented kind of go, I'm good at getting better every day. I'm going to give you a challenge of seeing if you can actually get better at being competitive. What improves your ability to take someone else on, to use them as a source of reference, as an inspiration? So, you know, they both work all of these things work in a complementary way. It's just not taking it at face value, as you say. It's just like Ben Goldacre's book, Bad Science, that he wrote ages ago. He had some T-shirts made that was, I think you'll find it's a little bit more complicated than that, which is, you know, a rather patronizing type approach. But it is, you know, it will always be a bit more complicated than something that is boiled down to this is good and this is bad.
Yeah, I mean, a good friend of a good friend of the show, and Judy Murray supports a lot of our work, and she wrote the foreword for her book. I was just thinking about when you talk about competing there. I mean, I was sat with my kids the other night. I thought Andy Murray is just the ultimate competitor because he just stays there, doesn't he? He just gives himself he just stays in the game. He finds a way. He finds a solution. And I was thinking about exploring a blog on what does it mean to be a competitor? And that's
So I wrote something 15 years ago about, can you suffer from Federer syndrome, which was all about the fact that, can you be brilliant at knowing how not to be beaten in order to give yourself the opportunity to still win? And if you look at tennis and you look at those players over, the top four of Murray, Nadal, Djokovic, and Federer, in their own way, they're driven to succeed, but they're really good at knowing how to play to make it really difficult to beat them. They're really good at not failing.
Yeah.
And if you're really good at not failing for long enough, that might turn things around for you to then start winning again. But if all I've got is win, 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 actually, I've lost some of the art of competing, which is actually the enjoyment of frustrating an opponent until such point that the momentum shifts back again. So there's these things that we go, oh, it's got to be winning. It's got to be, well, maybe being the best in the world at not losing might be your starting point, because that might open up the opportunity to be successful or to win. And I love that type of stuff, because it's just like, look, it's all a game anyway. It's playing games for a living.
Yeah, I mean, let's throw in another one then while we're on Olympic theme, because beyond proud of her performance last night, Georgia May Fenton in the gymnastics. So I know Mum Lisa well, and Georgia's actually helped me out with a couple of sessions that we ran with some young gymnasts at South Essex. And we were talking about comparisons, because surely comparisons, Chris, is the thief of joy. Yet Georgia watches lots of other people and will openly say she nicks people's routines, and she looks to it based on other people. So let's just chat.
I love that one, because it's just like, okay, so when Roger Bannister did the first sub 4 minute mile, how come loads of other 4 minute miles then got done as well? Just like, bad comparison is the thief of joy. But actually, social learning theory tells us one of the best ways of building confidence is, Albert Bandura's work shows us that one of the best ways of building confidence is vicarious experience, the observation of others who are similar to me, in order that I can steal their confidence that they've done something. I can go, well, I'm like you, and if you can do that, so can I. So I just kind of go, well, it's not comparison that's the thief of joy. Terrible comparison about someone else's result when you're not anywhere near capable of delivering that result, and then holding yourself accountable to doing the same. That's just sort of blunt comparison.
Yeah.
Let's get really clear about what healthy comparison looks like, but what needs to be true about how I compare myself with myself in order to then bring in comparison with others. And I saw that in training squads. We had a lot of conversations, and in crews particularly, we'd talk about, right, can you all talk about the strengths that you contribute to this crew that you want everyone else to be able to follow the lead of? So I want you to actively be proud of what you offer, but know that you're doing that in such a way that people can benefit from the fact that this observational model is present.
Yeah.
And people, and confidence is one of the areas that I love the most. And there's a huge amount of people who get predominantly confidence from the outside in, confidence from what other people tell them about themselves, or confidence from them using other people as a reference point. I don't think it's as I don't think there is as many examples of people who naturally just, I'm confident from within and I don't need any validation from outside. So I love all of that opportunity to kind of go, well, if you value other people's perspectives of you and the ability to model against other people, how good are you at using that and accessing that? rather than all of the stories that sort of say you mustn't do comparison and you have to be self-referenced in your confidence. So I'm kind of going, I'm no good at doing confidence for myself. But I've been told that I'm not good at doing confidence, and now I'm even less confident in myself because I'm not even doing confidence properly. So that's just like...
Yeah, I get it, and it's madness. And parents listening to this show, you know, with younger athletes, and we talk a lot about this, is they tell us that we're at our worst. A top three answer for young athletes: we're at our worst when we compare them to other athletes. But it's not when we're letting them compare themselves and they use it. It's when, as Chris has just said, we're making blunt comparisons. And actually, what we could be comparing with younger athletes is the fact that somebody's just physically more mature today.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean they will be in the future, but they are today. And
Yeah.
actually, you're expecting your child to maybe do things that they're just not capable of doing. And you tell that to a young person when they probably know that and make some of their own comparisons. That's some of the bad bits that we're seeing, some of the things we need to consider and work with.
Yeah, yeah, and developmentally, kids are looking at different things to work out how competent they are anyway. There is a developing process where they start to understand competence and what skill looks like. But to begin with, there's a lot more focus on kind of effort and the way in which you kind of engage. So, so we would be using an adult reference of this is what competence looks like and trying to impose it into a child who kind of doesn't have the same scorecard. They're kind of going, I don't, it doesn't fit for me. But actually, we can be really helpful in terms of going, what feels important for you. So I think a lot of the collaborating with the kids and asking them, what do you think? What are you seeing? What are you noticing? What would you like me to look out for? Actually, if they're being engaged in the process of building confidence together, then it becomes a great shared mission rather than me trying to inject it into someone else on their behalf, because I think they could do with a pep talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I like this one because, as I mentioned earlier, we touched on this because I think managing disappointment, failure,
Yeah,
whatever language you want to use to do it, and you recently said this, and I like this. Failure is not simply anything other than the success we want. Intelligently defined failure will set you free to pursue success. Now, how do we help then sports parents? What are your thoughts around disappointment, failure, working with young people, around just working their way through what is difficult for everybody, yet everybody's gone through it. They're not unique.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things here which I think are much more about yes, you mentioned the curiosity word earlier, but I think the mindset of curiosity, where it's about, I wonder how well this part of your performance can be delivered today. I wonder how much fun you can have in this bit. I wonder how freely you can do this bit. I wonder how quickly you can respond to this type of situation. So if you're going in with a desire to find out how well something might be done that's been practiced, there isn't really failure associated. There's simply the opportunity to kind of get a benchmark of how well have I translated what I've practiced into a more pressurized environment. So you're really saying we're defining success as the ability to translate what we've prepared into the moments where there is scrutiny and pressure associated with it. So that's nothing to do with the result. That's nothing to do with the outcome. It's much more to do with success is about the performance and the demonstration of growth and progress.
Yeah.
That's why I say, intelligently defining failure. Failure is practicing something and then going and trying something completely different that you've never practiced before. Failure is actually starting to do it, but only doing it half-heartedly. Because you kind of, for some reason, that's a shame because, you went for it and then didn't follow through. We can be more successful next time by thinking about how do we get you to commit to the whole thing. So if we define what failure is up front, that allows us to kind of go, we'll only be disappointed if these failure things crop up. But we're not going to define success purely on did you get the result or did you do the personal best or did you get player of the match or whatever, because that's just it's not really about growth and progress. You might You might play terribly and get player of the match because everyone else was it's just like, it's too blunt an instrument when you're on potentially a pretty long process of growth and development through a sport. Because I tell you that one of the biggest things that I talk to the Olympians about and other athletes is I've talked to them about, how did you used to play when you were doing it for the first time? Can we get some of the freedom of just doing it for the joy of it into your Olympic performance? Because kids are usually just going out there to play and have a go.
Yeah.
And we want to keep some of that spirit alive. And if we can focus on it, go and have a go at this, because that would be really exciting if you can do that. We can harness that joy and discovery. And if that can be more prevalent through a junior career, just think how powerful that becomes when you can switch on pursuing the joy of the moment when everyone else is telling you there's an Olympic gold medal you should be focused on.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? We're spending a lot of time, Chris, from a sports parent's point of view, working with parents to help their kids understand why they're winning and why they're being successful, and looking at some of the sort of character traits that they're going to give themselves the best chance of maybe achieving what they're achieving. And if on a given week their kids are displaying those traits, regardless of what the outcome says at the end of that week or that particular thing, we know that outcomes are going to come and go. If we knew had a crystal ball, Chris, and we could predict every single outcome, we wouldn't be sat here. We'd be very wealthy, wouldn't we? So
and the bookies would be very poor. Yeah, exactly.
They will. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an important thing again for us as parents, just to think about our conversations at home around failure, disappointment. What are we actually focusing on as our children's success?
Yes.
And God, and one of the other things, Kurt, I was just thinking, because I think this is become more and more prevalent, I guess, is how do you separate when your kid's really upset, like properly upset, for something that is just normal disappointment? So I've been saying recently to parents, right, I can tell you now, over the next 5 years in this program, you're going to have the best day, the worst day, somewhere in the middle, somewhere above average, somewhere less than average. You're going to fall out with a teammate, you'll fall out with a coach. You're going to get injured. You're going to get let down by a referee or umpire decision. You're going to get asked to play out of position. You're going to get asked to, you'll be not selected for something you want to take part in.
Yeah.
That is enough. If you are entering performance sports environments, for me, they are all a normal part of the experience. They're not the greatest tragedy since World War II.
Yeah. And equally, if you're going in expecting daily, weekly, monthly growth in a beautiful kind of sort of straight line, again, that's not reality. And so, I historically, I would have done stuff like if you can get a wall chart, and it's very analog and not very digital, but an annual wall chart with a red, amber, green sticker thing on it that kind of goes, was there enough today to make it a green day? That I was really satisfied with the commitment I put in, the effort that I made. I learned something. Is there enough that it's a green day? Or maybe it was an okay day and didn't set the world on fire, but it's enough to be an amber, and then occasionally there might be a red day. But if you've got this thing on the wall and you can kind of see what the aggregation is over the course of a week, a month, 2 months, 3 months, and you can kind of go, how many reds are there actually in this thing? And are you going to be, do you want, and how well did you deal with the next day? And there's a Jim Loehr, American sports psychologist from the 80s and 90s. He talked about never having 2 bad days on the trot. So if you do know you get a red day, it's just kind of go, right, we've got an opportunity to practice bouncing back from a red day. Should we see what we can do? Because then it develops a useful skill. And another great sports psychologist, Ken Ravizza, another American guy, he talked about knowing when not to be in the competition for who can be most disappointed anymore. So, but have your time when you're showing you're disappointed, and that's fine because there's going to be an emotional reaction. But actually, there comes a time when it's useful for you to kind of go, right, I think I'm done with that, because I can start looking forward to making tomorrow at least an amber day, if not a green day. Yeah. But if I let the red linger for too long, I'm not actually developing some of that skill, which is developing the ability to manage some of those things that don't go in my favor. So I think a couple of things like that are useful. The other thing that's really important for me here is kind of going, because the 100% mentality is a really big one for me. On any given day, I'll wake up and I might not be 8 out of 10 ready, 9 out of 10 fresh, 10 out of 10 feeling on top of the world. But if I wake up and I'm a 7 out of 10 and I can get 7 out of 7, that's a green day straight away. And that's teaching me a really important skill, that I don't have to have everything exactly as I'd want it in order for it to be a great day. But very often we'll have a red day because I was 5, 6 and I expected myself to be a 9, 10. And you've got to earn the right to build up to that. But actually, it wasn't a red day if we'd have just been clear, kind of go, today it feels like a consolidation day. Everything isn't firing on all cylinders, but if I can do a really solid job of making it a 5 out of 5 or a 6 out of 6, that's going to be really good. So actually just being aware of what does good look like today, rather than it having exactly the same scale every single day, also means that we get disappointed in the right stuff, not just disappointed because we set ourselves up to be disappointed because we weren't compassionate enough in the first place.
Yeah, I like that one about, the scales can sort of reset and be different every day. I think that's important.
Yeah.
I was thinking of something we were doing in a girls' football program recently. We were talking about using little bits of motivational interview. We were talking about it in our journeys home and using the scaling stuff. And one parent did put the hand up and said, "Oh, well, but what happens if they gave themselves an 8 this week and then the next week they're not disappointed if it was a 7?" I said, and that was the explanation. Well, we're not judging it week by week as a grading. We're judging that day on how they were feeling and what the success, what we were working towards or whatever else. And I think that's important, that you reset the scales as opposed to be, "Oh, well, I'm now an 8, I'm now a 9, and now a 10. Everyone seems obsessed with a rigid.
Absolutely. And look, watch in Paris, because where there's heats and semis and finals, a lot of that is the art of getting to the final in the best shape possible, but being realistic that you're possibly not going to be in the final in the best shape of your life ever. But if you can manage that process and you've peaked and you've done all the right stuff, you'll still be good, but you might not wake up on the morning of your Olympic final feeling the best you've ever felt in your life.
Yeah.
And if you then go, "Oh, that's a shame. It was, the sun was supposed to be out, the birds were supposed to be singing, all sorts of glorious stuff." So it's like, actually, I was ready for this, and I'm a 9 today. And if I can make it a 9 out of 9, you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You never know. And you look at Tom Pidcock earlier in the week, and you look at sort of, Alex Yee earlier today. There's just this stuff that kind of goes, keep yourself in the game where whatever state you're in. That's such a valuable skill to learn, rather than requiring it to be flawless before you're kind of go, "Good, I'm going to do well today because nothing's wrong."
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, because I suppose if you think about it logically, you put the 8 runners across the track on the 100 meters. Who's to say that everybody's not feeling 6, 7, 8? There might not be any of them feeling 10 out of 10.
No, there might not be, and they've had to manage the heats, and then it's a recovery competition. Who can recover better between the semis and the finals? So they got that. So you are competing on recovery as well as competing in those things, and that's where you kind of go, how good a job can I do of keeping the capability and capacity there, rather than saying I mustn't lose any capacity whatsoever. It's just like, there's a cost to everything. How effectively can I repay it and top the bank back up in order to withdraw again? And that's some of the fun of, we've just seen it in Euros and tournament competition and momentum. It's about managing all those things over a period of time, rather than hitting round 1 and expecting kind of, right, I mustn't fall off anything. It's just like, hit round 1 and try and build, but recognize that by building technically and tactically, you're still having to take care of physical stuff and mental load as well. And that's why I love the challenge of all of that, because it comes, we're playing a different game here. We're playing the holistic performance challenge, rather than just focusing on what the medal table is or what the winning time was, which tends to be the thing that gets focused on the most.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I'm conscious of time, Chris, and we've obviously finished by talking about medals. So I guess this is more of a personal question. You've obviously been watching a lot of the action. What highlights so far? What are you most looking forward to between now and the end of the games?
Um, I'm looking forward to seeing Helen Glover race tomorrow. So she goes in her final tomorrow, which will be just really looking forward to that. Having seen the women's quad win the first gold in that event for British women's sculling this morning, looking forward to that. I'm looking for any time I can get to see Steph Curry playing basketball. I always enjoy that, and I'm just fascinated as to how that tournament might work out, because I think there's different performance ingredients across the different countries, and there's always some moments of brilliance in the athletics and some drama and some jeopardy. This is the first time for quite a while where I've sort of just really thought about spectating and what am I going to watch. So it's quite nice to just kind of be going, I might get some of my sort of just being a fan back, because I've definitely lost a lot of being the fan of sport. So this is quite nice to reset that. I thought Alex Yee was sensational this morning. I thought Tom Pidcock, his move, having got back on to the sort of to the front of the race, and his move to win the race was just a phenomenal bit of competitive instinct and execution, and I love that type of stuff whilst under the most intense fatigue. It's just exquisite, all of that stuff. But it's the thing I'm enjoying most is the fact that more often than not, you're kind of seeing everyone stepping into those moments where they need to execute, and they're nailing it. The women in the diving just did it this morning. You just look at all. They're just kind of going, oh my God, the pressure's on. It's the last dive. You got to nail it, and then they deliver their best dive of the competition, and all those types of things. Wherever you finish, I think that's brilliant, because it just nailed it in that moment when it mattered most, and you did it. And I don't care what the judges score or what the clock says, to be able to do that after all of that preparation, it's just like, oh, well, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and I'm glad they're also not plugged into what the commentators are saying and how we're reacting at home, because I think that would throw them miles off. But yes, it's amazing when those moments unfold. Chris, absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the action, and hopefully we'll get a chance to chat again at some point in the future.
Yeah, it'd be a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity to chat, and enjoy it yourself as well.
Thank you for listening. Check us out at parentsinsport.co.uk.